hours away from Major League Baseball's trade deadline. Ben Cherington been somewhat active. Goes out and gets a lefty, Jalen Beeks from Colorado. Gets Nick York. Sends Quinn Priester to Boston. Do they have any other irons in the fire? Joining us now to get into that is Noah Hiles from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. He's on the Fan Hotline presented by Sullivan Super Service, providing trusted plumbing and HVAC service for over 50 years. Good morning to you, Noah. Thank you so much for coming on. And first question, we have heard that the Pirates are in on Yandy Diaz, who is a first baseman, third baseman for the Tampa Bay Rays. Have you heard the same thing?
I've heard that they inquired on him, but nothing that separates him from the pack per se. I basically, most of the rumors that I've heard connected to the Pirates are, they've reached out, and there's been a lot of guys that they've reached out about. But you know, they do a really good job of not letting you know which specific individuals seem to be the highest on their priority list, perhaps because they don't necessarily have one or two guys that might be high on their priority. They have a set group of guys that they like, and they evaluate from there based off of the asking price. So, yeah, I know Yandy Diaz is someone that they've at least looked into. I don't know how serious they are about acquiring him compared to other people that they've reached out about.
Well, no, how good are the trades that they've made with York and with Beeks? I mean, does that give you any energy? Should that make Pirates fans happy right now, or is there still something left on the table to happen in the next 11 hours? 10 hours.
All right, let me equate these to purchases that we've all made in our life. Nick York is like buying a winter jacket right now. It's something that you probably aren't going to use in July, but he might be useful down the line. I look at what you gave up for York, Quinn Priester. This is a guy that probably wasn't going to work out here. A guy that they tried the maximum potential out of, but this was a guy that didn't really respond to their coaching really well. I think the reason Quinn Priester did not maximize his potential here was because of some things that they asked him to do, and he wasn't necessarily throwing the pitches as much that they wanted him to throw as much as he should have been. And you look at the position depth at where Priester played, there's a lot of great young starting pitching. They said, we can do without you. And they added a player in York where he gives them depth, and I think his ceiling is being another Nick Gonzalez. And with his system, he could play outfield. You could see him play another infield position. That's the flyer they took there. York doesn't help them probably this year. Maybe we see him in the big leagues in September. It's a guy who's played less than 50 games in AAA, but he's got a good hit tool. And I think that this is a guy they view to be someone who has a potentially higher ceiling than a Triolo or an Alika Williams or a Leover Piguero. Which I think is a decent trade if that's how that unfolds. It does, like I said, it doesn't necessarily help the 2024 club, but I mean, Quinn Priester, was he helping the 2024 club? Not a ton. So that made there. As far as Beeks goes, that's a move I was confident they were going to make, not necessarily for Beeks, but for what he is. They just needed an additional left-handed arm in that bullpen. You've got Chapman as the late inning leverage guy. That's not necessarily your lefty on lefty matchup. That's just your eighth. So Beeks is essentially what they hope Borucki would be. And that tells me that whenever we get this Ryan Borucki update, they paused his rehab assignment and flew him out to Arizona to reevaluate him. That tells me that that's probably not going to be a good update because they need their left-hand guy that they can bring in for three batters if a team ever has back-to-back lefties sometime in the order late in the game. You look at what Beeks does well. He's a soft contact guy. Throws a lot of fastballs, doesn't get a lot of swing and miss, but I think he can be someone that's effective if used in the right situations late in games. I mean, his numbers aren't great because he was a very high leverage guy for Colorado. He's probably going to be like the fifth best guy in this bullpen. So if you can pick and choose your spots to use him, I think he'll be effective. So those are the two moves they've made. I expect them to probably make one or two moves today before the deadline ends.
We're joined by Noah Hiles from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. talking about the Pirates at the trade deadline. Obviously, the Fan Morning Show is brought to you by Guardian Protection. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you don't think that bringing in Beeks would signify the end of Aroldis Chapman's time with the Pirates?
I don't think so, no. Based off conversations that we've had, myself and Andrew Destin, we've talked around, because that's been, I think, one of the more underrated points of this deadline is what do they do with Aroldis Chapman? Because there are times when the team was, losing in early July where it might have made sense if they continued to trend that way to flip Chapman, because I think there would be a high demand for him on this trade. There's always a high demand for Aroldis Chapman. Look at what the Royals got for him last year.
All-star pitcher, yeah.
Yeah, an all-star. So there's that temptation, but I don't think it would make sense now. I know that he doesn't want to leave Pittsburgh, and I don't see him being dealt based off of where they are, 2 games over 500, 2 games out of the playoffs. So I don't think Chapman's going to be the guy who gets dealt. I mean, I could see maybe a depth piece, like if they were to make a deal with another team in contention, they could trade off a bullpen piece, but I would likely now. I think they're really happy with where their bullpen's sitting, and I don't think Beeks is the replacement for Chapman.
We all know what Nutting said about a month ago during the interview with Sheets. I think you might have asked him a few questions, Noah, but it's one thing to hear Nutting say that, because he doesn't really go out of his way to say and be so straightforward about what could happen before the trade deadline, and saying that, everything's on the table. We need to go after it. We need to get, players in here, and we also need to develop. What do you think Cherington's actually really working with right now, like financially? Like, do you think that he has all the tools and all the assets to make a big move these past couple of days, and it just hasn't gone through?
I think he's working with the finances that he anticipated to be working with at this point in the year, whatever that is. I don't think there was a point in the season where Bob watched this team win a game and goes, "Oh, here's $30 extra million to work with." And I know people hope that would be the reality, but I think that I don't think they're going into this deadline looking to cut payroll. I think that if they plan to have $5 million extra, and that's just the number I'm throwing out for this example, if they plan to have a $5 million extra at the deadline, then that's what they're going to operate with today. If they planned on only having $1 million of extra payroll to add, then that's what they're going to add today. The payroll did go up a little bit with the acquisition of Beeks. That's not me patting anyone on the back. I mean, you got a mid-leverage reliever, so that's not a huge salary upgrade. But I don't think they're necessarily handicapped financially, but I also don't expect them to add a guy who's making $20 million a year and $20 million next year, because that's just kind of what this organization isn't known for.
Last thing here for you, Noah. You did say you expect them to make another move or two, and with your ear to the ground, I don't necessarily need a specific player, but if you have one, by all means, what do you think it would look like if they do add?
I think they get a rental outfielder for sure. That's just something that makes a lot of sense based off their need heading into this series, and makes even more sense now considering that Bay and Palacios both might be heading to the IL. So you add into the fact that you don't have depth there, and the guys that you do have there aren't necessarily hitting the ball. I think the real bat is a must. There are guys out there, and again, we've heard the reports about Taylor Ward. I've heard the report. I've heard that they've at least reached out on him. I don't know how much better he necessarily makes this team. Like, Taylor Ward is a league average player, but hey, they could league average guys in that lineup. Michael A. Taylor, he ain't going to go Hank Aaron in the 9th inning every single game. So I think that's a guy you could look out for. I haven't heard this connection, but his teammate Kevin Pillar would make a lot of sense based off of the contract, position that he plays. I could see that being something that and I know that he's available because I've seen reports that other teams have inquired about him. And then another thing that I think they could add would be a player that brings defensive versatility, a guy who could play up the middle both in the infield and in the outfield. Ahmed Rosario was a guy that had a perfect fit. The Dodgers obviously required him yesterday. And this isn't a name that I've heard connected to the Pirates, but just looking around based off of the team that he's on, another determining factor that you're going to be able to connect real quick, he does. Richie Palacios might make some sense for the Pirates. For the Tampa Bay Rays, second baseman, also plays some third base, also plays some outfield. He has multiple years of control left. I don't think he would be a high cost. He's kind of like his brother, an additional depth piece. I think he's a little bit of a more established big leaguer than his brother. But a guy like that, and I'm not throwing that out like I said. I'm not. This is just speculation as far as the player itself. But I'm just trying to throw out guys who fit the profile of a player that they might look to acquire between now and the end of the deadline.
Noah, really good, man.
I expect one or two.
Really good stuff. Thanks for waking up early. I know you're out in Houston. Appreciate the time. And maybe we'll check back with you later in the week after the deadline. All right, man?
Sounds good, guys. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Thank you, Noah. Good stuff from Noah Hiles.